So India over the last decade has seen a fascinating journey, a revolution of sorts in the digital realm, from less than 200 million smartphones at the start of the decade to now almost 750 million smartphones. 40% of the world's digital financial transactions every month happened right here in India. So how did this transformation come about? And what does the next technological decade or the Techade look like? Joining us now is the author of this fascinating new book, India's Techade, Nalin Mehta. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation here on CNN News 18. First things first, this book, India's Techade, this is what, your fifth or sixth? I mean, this is, I mean, you're not a techie. So what inspired you, or what was the germ of the idea for you to write something on the technological transformation here?
Thanks very much, Zaka, for that introduction. Why did I write this book? Essentially because, we are so used to now, we go out and we use the phone and use UPI and everything from big department stores to the sabzi wala to other places. See, in last year, I traveled about 2,000 kilometers across UP. And I was carrying a lot of cash with me in one of the most backward areas, thinking that I would need that cash covering the election. Yeah. I came back without spending a single paisa, because we were staying in the back of the beyond and backward places, both economically and socially, and everywhere the UPI worked. The phone worked as a form of currency. That completely knocked my socks off. I didn't expect that to see in some of the most backward regions of the country. And I think there is a much deeper story here. Over the last 10, 12, 13 years, I think we think of technical innovation as synonymous with Silicon Valley, yeah, or more broadly with the West. Yeah. I think what India has done on a scale never seen before is a digital revolution which is different because it has been enabled by the state. Not simply by the private sector alone. It's been enabled by the state. It's been created by some of the seeded by some of the institutions of the state, and it's been done on a scale that has never happened before and gone viral. Yeah. UPI is just one example of that. Yeah. And three things, Zaka. The combination of the cheap mobile phone, cheap data, and a unique digital ID system enabled this. Why I thought, because this is unprecedented, I think this has huge implications for our politics, for our economy, for the relation, how citizens engage with each other, how the government relates to its poorest. The relationship has changed because it's changed the way we work our welfare systems, yeah, and the hinges of the economy through UPI and so on. It also has huge global ramifications with digital public infrastructure of a kind that has now been built. Something at last count, something like 70 plus countries have been talking to India, expressing interest in how to export UPI, this. Yeah. So I think there's a story that we must tell about India.
So, but tell me, I think there's some chart in your book which indicates this as well. Is there a direct correlation, and I'm just curious to know, where was this inflection point where, the number of smartphone users increased exponentially and the price of data also fell pretty exponentially? I mean, is there a correlation between how the price fell and how?
Absolutely. I think India benefited from a inflection point of the coming together of these three things: the smartphone, the cheap smartphone. Yeah. See, mobile phones have been around since the mid 90s, right? Yeah. We all remember how when it used to be so of our generation at least, when making phone calls would be so expensive, data was a different thing. The inflection point is around 2015. Okay. If you map on a graph the price of smartphones, yeah, the price of average data per user per month and all of that, you can see around 2015 Jio comes in, and that there's a pre-Jio era and there's a post-Jio era. Once that happens, you combine that with a unique ID system. See, Aadhaar by itself would not have done much. You combine these three and then that gives you scale, because the real issues of a digital divide. Otherwise, all these tech stuff, they look good on a PowerPoint, they look good in tech, startup founders' rooms, but how do you take it to Barabanki?
So when did that mass consumption of technology start? I mean, some say maybe it was demonetization. Suddenly, overnight, there was no currency, there was no cash to use. That's when your big, digital financial players became active. Some say it was COVID. You couldn't move. You couldn't, get out of your house. So that's what enabled financial transactions. So where was that sort of?
So I would argue that the digital divide was a real thing in India. But I think the digital divide today is far more irrelevant today than it ever was before.
Why do you say that?
Simple, look at the data. Google will tell you 45% of all Indian, not Google, sorry, 45% of mobiles in this country are now in rural areas. Something like 1/3 of every Indian in rural India now connected to a phone and to data directly. If you look at searches in Google, significant number of them come from famously what is Bharat, from rural India, right? In voice search, over 90% comes from rural India. Now, between 2014-15, because by then the system scaffolding, it's like when you make a tech product, it's like a build. Aadhaar comes in, the cheap mobile phone, all of these things come in. Over a period of time, common service centers are built across villages, about 5.5 lakh gram panchayats they are built. That allows people, the jam thing happens around 15-16. That brings something like 500 million people into the financial system in a way that this simply weren't before. And that allows you to create a direct benefit transfer system of a kind that has not been seen before. Every government before this has spent money on welfare.
Yeah, correct.
The problem is the Indian state knew the poor, didn't know how to find them.
Yeah.
Now, with warts and all, it's not perfect. It is far more efficient than ever before. And that has led, and that can be used by both BJP but also non-BJP states. State governments, central governments, both have been using direct benefit transfers.
Correct.
I would say, and you mentioned COVID, you had something like 80 crore people benefiting from money in their account during the COVID period.
Correct.
We saw the deprivations in the COVID period. We saw the dead bodies in the Ganga. That was real suffering. I would argue one of the reasons why we didn't have political upheavals of the kind that could have been expected after an upheaval of that kind was precisely because you had a new kind of social welfare net that was built up because of this tech which was put up, and COVID was the proof of that.
But tell me something. I mean, because you said digital divide is today far more irrelevant than it was perhaps say a decade ago. But we saw this in COVID as well, and most, in the most exemplary fashion in the case of students, right? Learning from home. The ones who had access to a laptop and internet connection at home, they were seen as the privileged class. And there was a large section of students who didn't have access to this. So are you saying that situation has now changed in the 3 years since COVID? Or if, let's say, God forbid, another COVID were to happen, you wouldn't see that kind of a digital divide today?
I'm saying that I don't think we should... we can underplay the differences in our society in terms of class and so on, though they exist. I think privileged children had it far better, of course, because of mobile phones and so on. What I'm saying is the difference today is significantly different from what it was 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, and that has allowed us, you'll see progress over the next 15 years. What we've seen in the last 8 years is a paradigmic shift, and I think it's like you see a glass half full, glass half empty, right? The glass half full is something that was unimaginable even 5 years ago. We didn't imagine the kind of virality a UPI would have. Even 6-7 years ago, it looked like science fiction. Direct benefit transfers looked like, some idea by policy wonks. It was never meant, nobody thought it would become the real of the way it had. I am saying that allows us the possibilities in a country like ours with the challenges that we face that we never thought were possible to solve. Of course, a lot more needs to be done. For example, fraud has to be removed. There is still a lot of duplication. They see the number of ration cards that have been found to be duplicates, the number of Aadhaar cards that were duplicate. A lot of that qualitative thing has to happen.
But let me get one thought from you on this jam trinity that you talked about, and the government also keeps talking about it. What is so different about it from the point of view of how that has been able to plug leakages, from the famous Rajiv Gandhi statement that for every rupee that the government sends to the poor, 85 paise is taken by middlemen, only 15 paise reaches the poor. How is that changed because of this jam trinity?
Very simple. Direct benefit, when Aadhaar was set up by the Manmohan Singh regime, there was a debate after Modi took over in 2014 on whether Aadhaar will continue or not. I mean, a lot of people thought Aadhaar won't survive. A decision is taken somewhere around July 2014 by the Modi regime to continue this and to double down on it. Once that happens, look at the numbers. You've seen in terms of direct benefit transfers, in 11x growth, including the Manmohan Singh period and now, between 2013-14 to 22-23, 11x growth in terms of number of schemes that were applicable. 8x growth in terms of the beneficiaries, went up from 10.8 crores to somewhere around 92.3 crore beneficiaries by 2022-23. In terms of the actual money, it went up by 110 times, from 7,000 crores in 2013 7,367 crores to be precise, to 8,13,287 crores if you take benefits in kind as well. What has happened in this period is that so many more people came into your safety net that simply was not possible earlier.
Yeah.
Now, that to me, the government says, now initially, the government said this also takes away leakages. I'll give you an example. Typically in a gram panchayat, if people always had to pay bribes to be eligible for a government scheme. I'm not saying bribery has gone away. So typically it will be 5 stages, right? It'll go from central to state, state will give aage, it'll go to the gram panchayat head, it'll go niche. I spoke to a gram panchayat head in Western UP, and he gave me I'm from a Samajwadi party, and he gave me a very good example. He said, look, he was not happy about it. He said, look, the biggest problem is we can only adjudicate somebody's name based on the SECC census.
Yes.
When that name comes, the money goes directly into that person's account. We have no role.
Yeah.
Sometimes the bribery still happens because somebody still has to pay money, because if I am a beneficiary and you are the gram panchayat head, I may still pay you some money because I want you to make me eligible for the other scheme also.
Correct.
But earlier, if I was
paying money
you,
to get money.
Exactly. The problem is, but now the money has come into my account.
Yes.
So the power equation is shifted. Earlier I was हाथ फैला के आपके पास आ रहा था.
Correct.
अब पैसा मेरे पास आया है. So the equation has changed on the ground, and that I think is an underestimated revolution. It extends from central government schemes like PM Kisan to PM Awas Yojana to state government schemes of like Raitu Bandhu in the Kisan scheme in Telangana to other schemes in West Bengal to other schemes in Tamil Nadu. I think this has had a huge social ramification on the ground.
Okay.
And leakages about 25,000 crores have been shut out.
So let me get a final word. This is about India's decade. What about the next decade? I mean, where does India go from here? Because there are 2 parts to this question. One is, yes, we have about 50,000 plus startups now. It's one of the biggest startup ecosystems in the world. But startups are also facing a bit of a funding winter, if you will, right? A lot of startups have had to lay off people and so on. And ultimately, directionally, let's say the decadal journey, are you going to see Indian companies in a position to take on, let's say, the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world, the Apples of the world, the biggest tech companies in the world? I mean, today we're in an age of ChatGPT. It's all still coming out from Silicon Valley. How does that change, and when does that change?
I think that is $1 million question. I think we have significant challenges can that change? Yes, this is a question that was put up yesterday. Vijay Shekhar Sharma of Paytm said absolutely. In 4 or 5 years, you will see something like that. One of the I think we have with digital public infrastructure in particular, one of the challenges that will come up for India, which we must solve, is the role of the state. It has often been said when the state stays away, those are sectors that go ahead. That happened with IT, that happened with the startup ecosystem and so on. With digital public infrastructure, for example, by Aadhaar, or when you take it overseas, you will probably have to create some kind of commons, global commons. You'll probably have to create independent structures which people will have even more faith in, because when the state is involved, how much of state overreach do you have? Those are issues that are evolving right now. I think how we resolve those as a society, as with the state and civil society and the private sector, is what will define many of these things.
Sure. All right, Nalin Mehta, is always a fascinating conversation, and good luck on this new book, India's Decade. I'm sure going to read my copy. So if you've been tuned in to this conversation, thank you very much. We'll see you again next time.